Welcome back, you guys, to the Crossroads of Thought podcast. My name is Frank.
And my name is Ariel.
And for this week's episode, the topic is trans women in collegiate sports. Ariel will go ahead and talk about the rest of the subtopics.
And so for this week, like Frank said, we're going to be going over trans women in collegiate sports. We're going to go ahead and start off with background information on Lia Thomas. We're going to go over what the controversy was, what happened, who are the affected parties. From that background information, we're going to go into our first subtopic of what our overall thoughts are on the situation. After that, we'll go ahead and move on to the next subtopic, which are what are our limitations and priorities concerning transgender athletes competing in women's high school and college sports. And then for our final subtopic, we're going to do something funny. We're going to be, if you guys have watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, we're going to be asking what bending ability we would take, what nation would we choose, and which one we think we would fall into. And then, of course, it has to be a debate, so we're going to have to defend our nation at all costs.
Nice. Exactly. So this should hopefully be a fun one. And like always, we do have a listener's discretionary notice, and it's as follows. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the hosts and guests and do not reflect the views, policies, or positions of any organization, company, or employer we may be affiliated with. The content is for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered professional or legal advice. Listener discretion is advised.
Starting with the background information of Lia Thomas and what the controversy was, what happened, who are the affected parties. Lia Thomas is a trans woman who competed and won the 500 freestyle in the women's competition. The backlash comes from her placing first in a field where she had perceived unfair advantages due to her being biologically male. She won this competition back in 2022. Teammate Paula Scanlon and competitor Riley Gaines seem to be at the forefront and most vocal critics of Lia Thomas. This controversy has recently caught a second wind, due in part to Trump's executive order keeping men out of women's sports and Congress's bill Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act. Moving on, the NCAA rule at the time of the competition was that trans women needed to complete a year of testosterone suppression treatment. In 2022, prior to the swim meet, it was changed so that trans athletes have 3 years or needed to have 3 years of documented hormone levels. They delayed the implementation until after the swim meet. And I think that sums up the background information for me.
Yeah, and kind of just feeding off of Ariel. So I'll add a little bit of background additionally. So for Lia Thomas, she began her transition in May of 2019 by starting hormone replacement therapy. She came out as the transgender woman to her coaches, friends, and teammates during her junior year at the University of Pennsylvania, which would have been in the fall of 2019. At the time, she was 20 years old. So for her first 2 years, she had been competing for the Penn's men's swimming team for her first 2 years before transitioning. So she went on HRT at the time. So the NCAA had a rule in which you had to be on HRT for a year. So she went ahead for her junior year. She went on to compete but not as much because she was taking HRT. And then COVID happened. So she was able to get an extra year of eligibility. So at that time that she actually was going to compete for her senior year, she had been on HRT for at least 2 years. So at the 2022 Ivy League Championships, Lia Thomas secured 3 Ivy League titles and program records, performances that qualified her for the 2022 NCAA Division I Swimming and Diving Championships for the first time in her career. Her college teammates openly supported her. However, 16 Penn swimmers anonymously signed a letter stating Thomas was taking away competitive opportunities from them in meets. such as the Ivy League championship. On the national stage, she won an NCAA title in the 500 freestyle and also tied for 5th in the 200 free dive. So that's kind of what I was able to find as far as background is concerned. What do you think overall from what I said?
That's seemed like that's a lot of what I was
very similar. Yeah. I think the only potential difference, or I guess something different that because you said 3 years, right? For when they were trying to create a ruling.
Yeah.
I thought I read that for when it was getting closer to where you're talking about when it was getting closer to the NCAA championships.
Yeah, so it was during that time where they went ahead and created a new rule where they wanted 3 years of documented hormone levels.
I think she was at 34 months. Yeah.
But they went ahead and made an exception just because of how close, and she wouldn't have been able to participate. And so they just kind of made an exception because they just made the rule. And so they went ahead and placed it to after the competition. Yeah,
I think I saw a similar thing. I don't know if they made it into a rule. I know they were talking about it, but I don't know if it was like ever actually implemented. I think it was kind of floating, but that's like besides the point. But I think I'm good at my end for the background. Cool. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on to the actual subtopic number 1.
So with the first subtopic, going off on the background information, what are our thoughts on the situation? I'll go ahead and start off with my conclusion and where I kind of settled. So I think that part of the issue in this situation is that Lia Thomas was born biologically a male. And I think that by allowing a biological male to compete in women's category defeats the purpose of the division of these two categories. The purpose of the division being to create relatively fair competition amongst biologically similar athletes. In Lia Thomas's case, she seems to have an advantage due to her being biologically male. She has gone through male puberty, and some advantages are just never going to go away with hormone therapy. So with that said, from what I was seeing online, there's like certain advantages that males have in terms of bone density, in terms of specifically in swimming, there's a few things that help out. Longer torso and arms, broad shoulders, lean muscle mass, strong core. These are all things that make strong swimmers. And when you go ahead and talk about what males have specifically, they have, in more general terms compared to women, they tend to have more power and more strength, not as much endurance. But because of things because of Lia Thomas's size of being 6'4" and her strength, it seemed like she was able to perform better because of her biological advantages that she got because she was male, even after hormone therapy. It doesn't seem like there was that fair competition, and so that's where I would go ahead and end what I'm going to go ahead and say.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and reiterate the subtopic. So what are my overall thoughts on the situation? I think Dario hit a lot of kind of the points that I was also going to kind of preface it. I think overall it's kind of a tricky topic. I can understand how for some biological women might have an issue with having to compete with someone who was born as a biological male and have gone through the whole puberty phase and then want to compete as a female, albeit that they're taking hormone replacement therapy. I can see that. I wonder how that's going to play out overall. I did want to bring up an interesting article that I was able to find. So, and then as of February 25th, 2025, so this is according to the Pew Research Center, Americans have grown more supportive of restrictions for trans people in recent years. A new Pew Research Center survey finds that majorities of U.S. adults favor or strongly favor laws and policies that require trans athletes to compete on teams that match their sex assigned at birth. So currently it's at 66%. I thought that was interesting. So like even more specifically, so from 2022 to 2025, it went up 8 points. So previously it was 58. So in the course of like 3 years, it went from 58 to 66% for having to have trans athletes compete on teams that match their sex assigned at birth. I thought that was interesting. It's pretty cool metric. They have several metrics that they were trying to get numbers at. So looking further in, I was able to see one when I was looking at Republican/lean Republican, and then also Democrat/lean Democrats, how they voted or what they thought. So when looking further in, so from 2022 to 2025, so for Republican/lean Republican, it was 85 to 88%. So it increased 3 points. On the Democrat side, it went from 37 to 45. So you can see an increase there. So it's interesting how, like, as you know, time's beginning to progress. It seems to be that now it's kind of trying to go for trans athletes to compete on teams that match their sex assigned at birth. I thought that was kind of an interesting thing to add. And I'm sure we're going to talk about it more in the conversation on this next part, or the main area. We'll begin to kind of talk about this. But with that, I'll go ahead and end my part. So now moving on to the conversation piece. So based on like the stats I gave from that Pew Research Center survey,
the polling, right?
Yeah, what'd you think? Like overall, like considering just the different percentages overall, and also the ones that are political affiliated.
I mean, yeah, I think that there's more openness amongst Democrats when it comes to transgenders in general. So it's not too surprising that the numbers were lower for those who were in favor for this type of thing. Or I think I might be saying that reverse. Yeah. But Republicans were definitely more. There wasn't much change there.
Yeah.
It was already a high number.
Yeah.
You see the shift happen more now, and I think I'm not too sure. I think that there's just more recent focus that's being put on it as of recent. So it's not too surprising. I can see the shift. I think one of those things that a lot of people think of, at least one thing that I'm thinking of, is like a 6'6" basketball player just going to dunk on a girl. And I think that's kind of what people like have in their mind when they're like, or at least I should say that's what I have in my mind when like I'm thinking of this conversation. I will go ahead and say that I think there's a bit more nuance to it, because I think the whole thing is competition. But when I was doing some research, one of the numbers that I heard, or one of the things I heard quite a bit, was like he was placed 456th in the men's competition.
Yeah. And
that is true, but it was during his hormone therapy that he got those numbers. Mm-hmm. In terms of how he was doing at UPenn prior to the transition, or prior to the hormone therapy, he had, so in the 200 freestyle, nothing crazy, 554, which is not great, but in the 500 freestyle, he was 65th and 32nd in the 1650, like 32nd place in the nation. That's what we're talking about. He finished second in men's 500, 1000, and 1650 freestyle in his university. So he was not he didn't come in first place in terms of the men like he did in the women's competition, but he wasn't a slouch either. Like he was still pretty competitive. In the men's division. So I did want to go ahead and put that out there. And then one of the things that I also went ahead and saw is that there are while there are advantages that he would have or that she would have in that period of transitioning, there would be disadvantages that come with it as well. Advantages being like he's more or she's more aerodynamic because she was male biologically. There would be leaner. The disadvantage would be that they have like she has less muscle mass to go ahead and support the weight, and so she wouldn't be able to get as much energy from the exhaustion. Like she wouldn't be able to re-energize as quickly as someone who is not going through hormone therapy. So
what do you think about the whole like? So like all of a sudden in her senior year, she basically in the Ivy League championships, she secured 3 Ivy League titles and also program records, and then took her to the Division I swimming and diving championships, and that's when she became like national champ. She was able to do so, but on HRT. So, but previously, if you look at maybe her first 2 years when competing as a male, like wasn't unable to get to nearly that amount of success. Like, what do you think happened there? Do you think it was just kind of like they were just maybe they were competing harder or something? Or
I just don't think that she was as much of an like she wasn't better than the rest of the competition. Obviously, like I don't know what it was. Like maybe it was her training regimen, maybe it was something else. Like I'm not too sure there.
Do you feel like maybe? Do you think now that she's competing in this female category, obviously that must have had some sort of effect, right? It's a matter of like how much, right? Overall, like when you look at, especially when like there's a reason why they have a men and women's like we already have the division as it is, and it's been that for a while, right?
Yeah,
and I think for the men's swimming records, like I think they're if I'm not mistaken, I could be talking out of my ass, not gonna lie. I think the records for males when swimming, there's a separation. It's a threshold. Yeah, theirs is a lot more like, I guess, I don't know, harder might be the wrong word.
Oh, they just have better times.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Versus if you take the average minutes, say, of a Division I men's swimming and compare it to that women's, I think there might be a potentially start contrast there.
Yeah, so just in general, the men's times tend to be better than the women's times from what I was seeing. So I think that they're like this is the whole point of this topic. It does seem that her build, because she's biologically male, it gave her inherent advantages that other women don't have. And so, like you were saying, there's a reason why we have 2 divisions, and it's sort of to create a competitive atmosphere with people who are similar in body structure. At least that's the way that I'm taking it. I think that there's something to be said about open competition, like where it's maybe there isn't like there's not really a matter of like whether or not it's male or female. I know that tennis has it, golf has it, but for those sports that do have that division, it's to sort of create some fairness in competition.
Yeah.
And that kind of defeats, if you have a male a biological male go compete in the women's division, it kind of defeats the whole purpose of the separation.
Yeah. Also, I don't know if tennis they have an open one.
They do. At least I'll say this, online they were saying that tennis, golf, fencing, they all have like opens.
Because they have there's a LPGA, that's the ladies. That's the golf thing, and then they have the men's, and then for tennis too, they have mixed doubles. That's when you have mixed doubles if you compare yourself with a female, and you have mixed doubles. But at least from as far as competing on like a 1v1 format, if I'm not mistaken, it's like they have a males and then they females, but they have mixed doubles.
Yeah, I can.
But not so much. I don't think they have a like if you're competing with them 1v1 in that format. I may be wrong. I don't think I don't think they do that.
Yeah, I can see that. That might be a way to go ahead and make it. I think we go ahead and go into it in the second topic a little bit, but in my mind, it's like one of those solutions where it's like, because part of the concern here is that transgenders want to go ahead and compete, and I get that. How do you go ahead and create it in a fair environment for everyone? You go ahead and lay out ahead of time, like, hey, it's completely based on your skill, and you're competing against anyone and everyone. It might be a thing of ideally, or maybe not ideally, but we also we have men's, women's, and then we have an open type system where like that open competition, it's men and women competing, and so it doesn't matter how you identify as. You're welcome to compete. And
then I have more to add, but that's kind of my second topic that I about. So that's something that we can always revisit. I know I saw this thing. It was kind of interesting. So I asked ChatGPT like if there was if there were ever like situations in which like you had a top ranked male like tennis player against a top ranked women's tennis player, and it gave me an example in which I think this has happened in the 80s if not mistaken, but I forget the name of the guy, but he was in his 50s. He was a pretty good tennis player. Like he was ranked number 1 for some time. Like he did have his success internationally. He was good, but he's in his 50s now, not nearly as good as he was in his prime, and he challenged one of the top. I think she was like top. She might have been number 1 or at least like within the top 10 internationally. Yeah. And she was in her prime. I think she was like 28, but her prime years. Yeah. And they believe they competed, and I think the older guy won, if I'm not mistaken. I think the older guy won all sets. I think it was like 6-2, 6-3, 6-2. And the older guy won. So I thought that was kind of interesting, like as far as like someone is in their prime, top ranked for their as a female, and then competing against still it's going to be a guy, right? But they were elite at some point. But granted, they're a little bit older, but they're still able to like compete, be competitive. But then he beats. To kind of show kind of maybe the levels to it, Also, I may be wrong in this story. I might have it flipped, but I'm pretty sure I said it correctly. All right. So take it with a grain of salt.
It depends on the sports specifically. With tennis, with a lot of sports, it does come down to it doesn't come down to power and strength, but to a certain extent, there's part of that incorporated into it. Mm-hmm. And for those tasks specifically, at least men generally are better than women. Now, that doesn't mean that women can't be, that all men are stronger than women, but that does, I forget where I was going with it, but men would go ahead and do better in those when it comes to strength and power, if you were to relate it to tennis or to golf or to soccer, like that all kind of helps out. I think maybe there might be a different story if we were talking about gymnastics. Maybe where at that point we're talking flexibility. I didn't look specifically into flexibility, but I imagine that, or at least from what I've seen, like in yoga videos, guys are terrible at flexibility. So in terms of gymnastics, maybe women go ahead and perform better. Yeah. Long term, like over like age. But that's just something like I'm coming up with on the spot, like just switching the roles type thing.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's interesting because I have watched some of the men's gymnastics. I think So I might be confusing. I don't know if it was during like the Olympics or some big international event, right? It might have been just a Division One like gymnastic championships, and it was cool because I was watching and like it's cool because you can see their energy. It's kind of infectious even through the screen. It's like it's cool. Like they're trying their best. And specifically on the thing that they kind of like they rotate around. I forget what it's called, but I think it's gymnastics. I think
the bar.
Yeah, the little bar thing. They kind of rotate their hips like crazy. And I remember I was watching it. It was like towards the end of it. I think I forget what school it was, but pretty much the guy needed to score a certain point and higher in order to secure the win for their team, and they win the championship. If he doesn't hit it, the other team wins it. So it was like high stakes. And from what I remember and hearing the announcers, the score that guy needed to get, like it wasn't an easy score. Like it needed to be a tough one. And it was cool, bro. Like I saw it, and man, yeah, it was so nice. It was so good. Like he was very like on spot. Everything was good, and he landed it perfectly, because I guess a big part of the score is also the way how you land it. Like especially the control you have, especially if you're rotating out of, you're supposed to land. So the way how you go about it, how much control you have, your positioning, whether or not when you land you take an additional step, like all that comes into consideration. But anyway, this guy like lands it like just like perfectly, is in a great pose, doesn't like fall over, and the announcer, you can tell like, oh, I think they're getting like super like hyped up. Ultimately, and then he went over to the side and he's with his team. They're waiting the score, and boom, they say the score, and it's higher, and then you see him go crazy. But anyway, it's kind of interesting to see also on the male gymnastics site as well. But it doesn't get nearly as much media attention, I feel, for the male gymnastics. Maybe that's not something like there might be other interests that obviously just based purely off viewership. It doesn't get as much eyeballs. But anyway, with that being said, do you have anything else to add?
No, I think we can move on to the next subtopic.
Okay, great. Let's go ahead. So for the next subtopic, it being, what are your limitations and priorities concerning transgender athletes competing in women's high school and college sports? So I wanted to provide a little bit of background. So what does transgender mean? So transgender, often shortened to trans, refers to a person whose gender identity is different from the sex they were assigned at birth. So an important distinction which helped me overall, since I was not the most informed, to be honest. So biological sex is based on physical characteristics, so like chromosomes, hormones, your anatomy, so that's assigned at birth. While gender identity is a person's internal sense of who they are, so male, female, both, neither, or somewhere in between. So being transgender isn't dependent on whether someone has had surgery or taken hormones. Next, I kind of went over trying to find more stats related to some of the characteristics whenever you're looking at male to females. So with that, so strength, flexibility, speed, a couple other characteristics. So upper body strength. Women possess approximately 55.8% of men's upper body strength. Lower body strength. Women's lower body strength averages 71.9% of men's. So next, trunk strength. This is your abdomen and back. Women's trunk strength is about 63.8% of men's. Now, hip flexibility. So this is lifting your knees towards your chest. So women average 122 degrees, while men average 116 degrees. Internal rotation. So this is how far your thigh can rotate inward when your hip is bent. So it's kind of like when you're sitting. So women average 35 degrees, while men average 27 degrees. Now, sprint speed. So men generally run 10 to 12% faster than women across various distances. Grip strength. So there's a comprehensive review reported that adult women have approximately 53% of the grip strength of adult men. Next, so talking about testosterone. So what is testosterone? So it's a variety of functions and maintains muscle mass, bone density. Both sexes have testosterone, albeit in different levels. So, for example, for men, from what I was able to find, they are somewhere between 300 to 1,000 nanograms per deciliter. For females, you are looking at 15 to 70 nanograms per deciliter. Now, as far as the actual questions is concerned, limitations and priorities concerning transgender athletes competing in women's high school and college sports. So, overall, I think it's a rather complex topic. I think on one hand, you do want to have fairness in play. Also, you want to have inclusion. They are by no means mutually exclusive. I think it's possible to have both. I don't know what that fully looks like, but I can present what I believe. So for limitations, I have reduction in testosterone, contact sports. So I kind of wrote down a couple. So wrestling, football, boxing, hockey, lacrosse. Priorities. I wrote down equal playing field, inclusion, respect. So I believe we can incorporate possibly an idea of standards for high school sports. It could be more inclusive, while college and professional sports could have stricter biological guidelines. Although even in high school, when you're looking at it, it could be further refined. So, for example, looking at puberty, so the average male goes through puberty. The average male is 12 years old, while the female average is around 11 years old. Puberty also lasts for several years for both sides. So maybe instituting after the 10th grade, there's a stricter set of guidelines, aligning closer to college guidelines in the sense of it just being stricter. That could be an idea. I've also thought, I think we've talked about earlier in the discussion from the previous subtopic, is creating a separate category or even an open division. Perhaps for the open division, we can include kind of like the less contact-driven sports. So some examples can be like golf, archery, tennis. I'm sure we can even list off a lot more. Also interesting is this kind of thing I wanted to kind of add. So I looked at maybe some other athletes that can maybe have been a little bit more outspoken. So I was able to find that Caitlyn Jenner, who's a former Olympic decathlete and transgender rights activist, has made public statements that suggest the need for fair competition in sports. While Jenner is supportive of trans rights, she has expressed reservations about transgender women competing in women's sports, especially those who transition later in life. To quote, "You can't say, oh, we're going to put trans women into women's sports. It's not fair," end quote. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing to see, considering I'm kind of a sports guy. You know, I try to be as informed as I can on most sports. And obviously, I know Caitlyn Jenner's past, and then throughout the life, eventually transitioning and so forth. Though I thought that was kind of interesting to kind of see her opinion, her take. So with that, I'll go ahead and end my subtopic, and we'll go and move over to Ariel's.
Repeating the second subtopic, what are our limits and priorities concerning trans women competing in women's sports at college and high school level? For me, making competition as fair as possible while also being understanding of people's wants is kind of where I landed on. I think there's a lot of overlap with what Frank has already said. I think that the rules at the high school level and at the college level, it makes sense to be different. When I think of the purpose for student sports or high school sports, I think there's this variety of purposes of why it's there. Some of those reasons would be sort of to build camaraderie and sort of have team building. Once you get into the college level, it's a bit more competitive. And so having an environment that goes ahead and is more inclusive at the high school level makes sense to me. Once you sort of get into the collegiate and professional level, I think there needs to be more regulations in place. So I would go ahead and say that the limit sort of being, or the concern being, to go ahead and, for kids, make it a little bit more inclusive, and for at the college level, make sure that it is regulated to a certain extent.
All right, so we just finished up. Now we're gonna head towards the conversation piece. So, what'd you think of like the proposal that I had in mind, as far as like maybe in high school, like after once they are in junior year, now they kind of have stricter sort of guidelines that might be closer aligned to on the collegiate level. Like, what'd you think of that?
So when you say close, what are the stricter guidelines at the collegiate level?
So
are you thinking of?
Yeah, so I think, for example, for currently, if I'm not mistaken, I think if it's a transgender woman competing in a female sport, believe they need to be taking HRT, and they have to be under 2.5 nanograms per deciliter of testosterone.
Oh shit! Sorry. It seemed like there was a fire outside for a second. I freaked out.
Oh, no, you're fine. Yeah, sorry, it's also super dark in the room that we're doing it because it got kind of late. But anyway, so I can see your concern there. But so that's kind of the thing that I was kind of going off of. Like I don't know if it's being used now, but that's what I saw as if it's being current, or if it's a proposal or actually happening.
So I think there's. I can go ahead and understand, like you said, having some level of hormone levels. I don't think that's bad. I think that makes sense for 16-year-olds like who are looking to transition and they start taking hormone therapy and they go ahead and fall under a certain threshold. They're allowed to go ahead and compete. Like, that makes sense to me. I don't think, I don't think it'd be a problem to a certain extent, especially, like, if they're within that range of, like, let's say if they're within that range of how women are performing, like, I think it makes sense to a certain extent.
Like testosterone-wise or performance?
The end results, because testosterone isn't the only thing to look at, right? That is one of many factors that can go ahead and help or hurt these athletes. But you're asking, like, at that level, like, should it be closer to collegiate? I think it can be a little bit more forgiving. One thing that I was seeing, and I don't know if this is necessarily fair or not, but so one of the things I saw were in track and field, first place, or two of the people that were winning or won the race were trans women, and they didn't get scholarships. It was the women who performed the best. I don't think that it's going to set the women up for losses in the future. I think that part of the concern would be allowing them to compete, but definitely have some rules in place where they have to meet, at the bare minimum, like you're saying, like hormone levels. Like, to me, that does make sense. I just think that it should be a little bit more forgiving about that type of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, that's why I did the 2 years thing, like freshman and sophomore year. I think, and also we were talking about this off recording or off the pod, was like the reason why I picked junior year just because I know in high school, like, that's when you begin to get more eyeballs as far as scouts is concerned, like college scouts coming and looking at your games. Since you're getting closer to graduation, and if they feel like you have some skill and feel like you can maybe take it up a notch, they can, get more eyeballs, and eventually that might lead to a potential offer, like Division 1, 2, 3, whatever the division might be. You might get an offer. So that's kind of where I was kind of like the line that I was kind of going towards. Since you're getting closer towards the when it begins to get competitive, in the sense of you want to actually still compete in whatever sport it is at the next level. So meaning there's going to be less spots, right? Because just imagine all the athletes, all the high schools that are across the country. So it's a kind of a competitive landscape. So that's kind of how I was thinking as far as that being instituted on the junior year. Especially when it's going to be, I guess, more, especially if it's a contact-driven sport, like, I can see that being potentially an issue.
Yeah. I wanted to sort of not entirely pivot, but part of it, do you think that your opinion changed at all when doing research for this topic?
Honestly, I don't think I really. I maybe did have an opinion, but it was kind of like based on little to no information.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if anything, like, it might have. I guess it did change, but I think overall, I think kind of like, I think just kind of putting restrictions, or maybe even, honestly, even a combination of things. Maybe doing an open division on certain sports, maybe.
Yeah.
Coupled with the hormone replacement therapy. Mm-hmm. But I think of it, I guess also, like, I wonder how many of those cases are out there that's happening. So I think that would also be kind of like a thing to look. I'm just curious about the numbers too.
Yeah. I saw numbers. I know, the big popular number is like the NCAA has like 8,000 athletes and 10 of them are trans.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
So like very small percentage. For high school, I couldn't find a number. I found some state level numbers, but I didn't check it all. I think I was, prior to doing the research, I had this idea of there shouldn't be any situation where trans women go ahead and compete in the same division as women. I think that it makes complete sense, or at least completely open, like with transgender rights and stuff like that. But in my mind, it's like there's a biological difference. But seeing that they go ahead and that there are certain things that they go ahead and go through hormone therapy, and how that goes ahead and affects them. If at the end of the day they're a bit more similar to, because I don't want it to be a blowout where it's completely unfair to the women. Mm-hmm. If it's competitive, I'm a little bit more open to it now, in all honesty, than I was prior to this.
So given that, so how do you feel about that Lia Thomas? How, like, she basically, like, she's an NCAA champ, right? Mm-hmm. So, and then she was in hormone replacement therapy, but at the same time, she also she went through a transition post-puberty. Post-puberty,
like, yeah, that was a big thing that I learned too. Puberty is, well, it makes complete sense, but there's a difference between if they never, like, make it through puberty or not too, like, what that looks like. But go ahead.
Yeah, and even then, it's like puberty is like, it ranges, but I think for guys it's like 3 to like 6 years. It could be quite a bit of length and span. Same thing with women. I think theirs could be a little bit short. I think it's 2 to 5 years. So it's kind of like, it's like, then you begin to further go into the nuances of, like, oh, I started hormone replacement therapy at age 15 in the middle of it, right? So it's like, okay, how much of it did you go through puberty? Then you begin kind of into the nuances. But I think having the conversation of post-puberty, I think, is at least a good line in the sand, because you can say definitively post-puberty for the average male is at this, post-puberty for females is here. I think that's science, right? That's fact, right? Mm-hmm. Unless someone's able to come up with new research, but going up as a kind of a line in the sand, I think is a good approach. So considering for Lia Thomas's, that one's a tough one, because it's like
should she have been able to compete? Is what you're saying? Post puberty, regardless,
or I guess honestly, I don't even know what I'm asking, dude. Yeah. But it's kind of like
it doesn't help her situation that she went through post puberty and that she was only on hormone therapy for however long it was. I think you said 34 months.
So it was. So when she was competing, I think it was 2 years when she actually began to compete as a senior, and then by the time that I think she was going to do the compete in the championships, I think at that point she was at the 34-month mark, because I think that's when they were floating the new thing of like the new further restriction of like you need to be an HRT for 36 months for transgender women, but they granted that like exception, like you mentioned earlier, and eventually they still allowed her to compete.
Yeah, there's advantages because she's biologically male. From what I read, heart size goes ahead and sort of helps with athletes.
Yeah, lung capacity too. I think and is then, also.
Yeah, that's another one. Men are just more aerodynamic when it comes to swimming too, and she, granted, has less muscle now because of
the HRT.
The HRT, but I imagine that she's still very aerodynamic. I'm not exactly too sure of like what boxes she checks marks on that still remain the same. I think there's still a lot of science to be done on that. But it seems like there are advantages that she went ahead and had. One of the thoughts that I did have when I was like doing research is like, I don't think this would have been as big of a news report if she didn't come in first place. I think that this whole and I get it. Like this, here's an example of someone that's biologically male competing in women's division. I don't think it would have been as. There's a reason why this rose to popularity, because a lot of people caught on to this, and I think a lot of, like you said, what was her name again? Jenner.
Oh, Caitlyn Jenner.
Caitlyn Jenner. I think that there's a lot of people who are trans rights advocates, but at the same time are finding themselves on the opposite end of the situation, saying there's some advantages that Lia Thomas had that the other women didn't, and it's not a fair competition. Mm-hmm. So just trying to find when is it acceptable to go ahead and allow for this type of competition. So yeah, rules and regulations at the college or at the NCAA level make sense.
You're just iffy about the high school one, or no, you don't want regulation.
No, So here's the thing. I think that it makes sense what you're saying with the hormone therapy and them having that requirement, but I think that with Trump's executive order, they're no longer allowed to even go through therapy. That's what I'm thinking in my mind because of the
ramifications to a kid.
Yeah, something like that. And so like I do agree, but I wonder. I think that there might be situations where the executive order is even stopping that from happening. So I'm I agree with like if they go through hormone therapy, great. But in terms of I'm not even sure if that's going to be allowed anymore. In all honesty,
so that's more of your issue on that part.
In my mind, that's what I'm thinking in the background. It's like, I think that makes sense, but there's an executive order that, or at least, and I did some research, but I can't remember for sure. It seems like hormone therapy isn't even allowed at that age.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I don't know. But I like, if they were to go through hormone therapy, I think that it would. I think part of it would be like a case by case basis. It's like there'd be too much of a competition, or too little competition here. Like, there isn't. Like, at some point there needs to be some rules, but being a little bit more lenient with high schoolers, I think, makes sense.
Mm-hmm. You just don't know like where or specifics, pretty much, right? Like what that looks like, when, where,
yeah,
that kind of thing. Okay. What do you think overall about, like, for Lia Thomas? Like, I thought that was interesting, the part in which, like, so her college teammates, so they openly supported her. However, 16 Penn swimmers anonymously signed a letter stating that Thomas was taking away competitive opportunities from them in meets such as the Ivy League championship.
Yeah.
Like, what do you think of that?
I mean, I think that would make sense. Like, not that I'm saying like that. What I'm saying when I say it makes sense is, I think that there would be 16 athletes who would go ahead and be against what she, like, her competing just in general. I also saw, I think there was like an open letter of like 94 athletes, women athletes, who were like unbothered by it. But in terms of competitiveness, I understand. I can relate to them in terms of, it just seems like she has a advantage, and I don't think there's anything wrong in saying that, in terms of like, yeah, she's biologically male, so she has that advantage, or at least it's very likely that she has that advantage.
Yeah, on that very pure basis. Like,
yeah,
and yeah, I thought that was interesting. It's like, hey, we support you, but we're anonymously writing that you're taking away opportunities from us. Like, I thought that was kind of interesting. It's like, hey, we're supporting you, but secretly, this is how we actually feel.
Yeah,
which I can understand. It's a touchy thing, especially if your teammates, like, you don't want drama. You want to, like, the camaraderie to be well. You just want to purely focus on the sport. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting thing. So then you would have no issue with a boxer fighting and as a freshman competing against another woman, huh?
What's the gender of the boxer?
Huh? It's a female It's female boxing, right? But it's a transgender woman. So,
are they in the same weight category?
Yeah.
Oh, they're in the same weight category.
Yeah, same weight category. What is 15 years old? As a freshman, how old do you think you're? Like 14, 15 years old?
Well, like, because I think the idea, I think you went ahead and said, like, the boxer's transgender, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, or at least one of them is. Yeah. Like, if it's pre-puberty, like, go at it, right? Like, if it's pre-puberty, like, if the transgender woman hasn't gone through puberty as a male, like, have at it. After that, maybe there might be some rules to put in place there.
Yeah, I can see that too. Anyway, that was just more off the cuff, But cool, man. Do you have anything else to add?
No.
Cool. With that, we will move on to our final subtopic.
Hey guys, so as we were recording, or as we were editing the episode, it seemed like that last segment got lost somehow. So we don't have the last segment to go ahead and play for you. It was a good clip, but you guys, it'll forever be lost.
Yeah, it was a little disappointing because I think we probably went on for at least like 20 minutes, right? Like a whole back and forth.
A good 20, 30 more minutes.
And then it was just a fun topic. So I guess if anything, we hopefully can get a similar topic for the next episode and make sure to include it. And we'll make sure to make an additional copy. I think that's like a lessons learned moving forward to apply.
Oh, yeah.
So
still a work in progress, but we're working out the kinks.
Yeah, for sure. But like always, go ahead and make sure to check out all of our social media follows, Spotify, YouTube. We'll make sure we put all of our social media on there so you guys can follow us on most social media platforms.
Yep.
Do you have anything else to add?
No, I think that's about it for this episode.
Okay, great. So, all right, guys. So we'll see you
next time.